I used to be a pizza delivery driver. One night, while making a delivery to a house, I witnessed something so disturbing that it made me never want to deliver pizza again. Trouble had a way of finding me from a young age. I often fell in with bad influences, which led to my horrible, and oftentimes reckless, choices. My illegal antics frequently brushed against the law. Countless close calls only fed my misguided sense of invincibility until one night, when my so-called friends and I made a huge mistake. The sky was a bruised purple punctured with a million tiny diamonds as my friends and I, fueled by beer and the lingering buzz of weed, huddled in my neighbor's garage, around a single flickering bare bulb after sneaking inside. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of oil, and the distant hum of the fridge thrummed like a low heartbeat. We had squeezed through a gap in the fence, the rough wood scraping against our skin, and settled into a circle in my neighbor's garage as if we owned the place. My parents were away on a weekend trip, mistakenly assuming I was responsible enough to stay out of trouble. My friends and I sparked up a fat blunt. The acrid smoke stung my throat as I took a huge drag, feeling like a cartoon dragon exhaling a billowing cloud that hung thick and stagnant in the still air. Whether it was the smoke or just bad luck, I lost my balance and stumbled back, sending a toolbox crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. A pool of spilled solvent, previously unnoticed in the dim light, glinted ominously. The metal tools clanged against it, and a spark erupted, a tiny flicker that ballooned into a monstrous flame in an instant. Panic spread faster than the rapidly growing fire. My friends, their faces in fear, bolted past me, leaving me alone with the growing blaze. My lungs ached for fresh air, a desperate gasp trapped in my smoke-filled chest. With a surge of adrenaline, I ignored the searing heat and threw open the garage door. There stood Mr. Smith, my neighbor, his furious gaze piercing through the disheveled frame of his bathrobe. Without a word, he grabbed my collar and hurled me onto the damp grass. Then he ran over to a fire extinguisher, his face grim with determination, and desperately attempted to save what remained of his burned-up garage. Mr. Smith, his face flushed with anger, and the smell of singed fabric clinging to his bathrobe, barked into his phone, reporting the fire and our trespass to the police. Sirens wailed in the distance, a growing sound that mirrored the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The police arrived swiftly. My friends, eager to save their own skins, wasted no time pointing accusing fingers in my direction. From a legal perspective, the situation looked bleak. The authorities, their faces grim under the harsh glare of flashing squad car lights, classified my accidental arson as a criminal offense. The lack of intent mattered little in the face of the evidence. Trespassing, the remnants of the blunt, and the smoldering remains of the garage all painted a clear picture. The combination of our bad choices, trespassing, smoking weed, and the resulting fire, left no wiggle room for leniency in the eyes of the law. The judge, a stern woman, pronounced my fate, 4 months in juvenile detention. Those months became an enforced period of introspection, a monotonous battle against regret within cold, sterile walls. Oppressive silence, the clang of metal doors and the hollow thud of footsteps echoing my descent replaced the companionship I once craved. A month before completing my 4-month sentence, the court granted me conditional release, under the agreement that I repay the repair costs from Mr. Smith's garage. Every hard-earned cent I made over the next year went toward that repayment, a constant reminder etched in both money and trust. The weight of my past clung to me like damp clothes, and I trudged forward, one paycheck at a time. The air hung heavy in the house, thick with disappointment and the unspoken weight of my mistake. Mom sat beside me, her hands quivering slightly as she navigated through a sea of job listings on the unsteady glow of the monitor. I knew she was mad, heartbroken even. But beneath the anger, I saw love, a silent plea for me to understand the gravity of my actions. Dad, ever the pragmatist, sat across from us, a deep frown on his usually jovial face. Unlike Mom, his silence felt accusatory, a heavy weight that spoke volumes. The night went on, marked by the steady tapping of the keyboard. An hour in, we hit upon a job ad that looked promising. Pizza delivery driver wanted. It wasn't the dream job I'd hoped for, but it was a start. My parents felt the change too. They looked at each other. Mom's face lit up with hope, and Dad almost smiled. Mom, a whiz with words, polished my resume, turning it from a jumbled mess into a presentable document. Dad, seasoned by his own job interviews, coached me on how to behave during an interview, his stern questions a hard but essential practice. In that moment, their unspoken support spoke louder than any words ever could. A week later, I found myself outside Luigi's Loafs, its name flaking in red above the entrance. The air was rich with the classic scent of an old pizza place, a blend of sharp tomato, melting cheese, and the sizzle of pepperoni. In one corner, stacks of flour-coated boxes teetered, and the walls, adorned with faded posters, showed cartoon chefs tossing heaps of toppings with exaggerated enthusiasm. The gruff man who emerged from behind a swinging kitchen door wasn't the polished interviewer I'd envisioned. A flour-dusted apron clung to him like a second skin, and his voice boomed with a gruffness that could rival a foghorn. Desperation drowned any initial apprehension. I needed this chance. The interview itself was refreshingly short and to the point. He didn't delve into my past, didn't ask about the fire that still burned in my conscience. Instead, he focused on the essentials: age, driver's license, and the seemingly impossible task of juggling a piping hot pizza and a temperamental GPS. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like everything. This gruff man, with his flour-dusted apron and no-nonsense demeanor, had offered me a way to crawl out of the hole I dug for myself. The job itself wasn't a walk in the park, but it wasn't a disaster zone either. There were long stretches of downtime, with the occasional rush of orders that left me breathless and drenched in sweat. The base pay was a joke, barely enough to cover a week's worth of ramen noodles. Thankfully, there were tips. Those crisp bills, tucked into sweaty palms or clinking in the bottom of the delivery bag, were my savior. Every penny went straight to Mr. Smith, a constant reminder of the dead hanging over my head. But the real challenge wasn't the physical demands or the meager pay. It was the customers. On paper, the job seemed simple: deliver hot pizza, collect payment, smile politely. Reality, however, was a different beast entirely. Some folks were friendly, genuinely happy to see a pizza appear at their doorstep. But others, well, let's just say they could test the patience of a saint. A simple wrong turn or a slight delay could turn into a verbal maelstrom. I'd had doors slammed in my face with enough force to rattle my teeth, endured accusations of stolen sodas with the indignation of a wronged king, and even faced down a few Karens demanding free pizzas for inconveniences real and imagined. Those moments made me question the very fabric of humanity, leaving me wondering if kindness was an extinct species. One night at work, the clock on the wall mocked me with its luminous green glow that seemed to say, "Almost there." Midnight had just struck, and the promise of freedom, a bed, a shower, anything but another delivery, hung close. Just as I was about to switch off the radio for the blissful silence of a closing shift, my boss's voice crackled to life. "One more delivery," he announced. I swallowed a sigh that threatened to be an all-out groan. 2 steaming pizzas were shoved into my arms, the cardboard boxes emanating a comforting warmth that instantly clashed with my dwindling patience. A greasy note stuck to the top held the address scrawled in messy handwriting and the delivery phone number, that seemed to have more digits than usual. One glance at the GPS confirmed my suspicions. This delivery was far beyond the usual pizza radius, nestled deep in the heart of the quiet countryside. With a resigned sigh, I punched the address into the GPS, muttering a prayer to the tech gods for a decent route. The glowing screen pulsed with a suggestion, and the cheery voice announced a shortcut that promised a quicker route. Creek Road, or some variation of that, flashed across the screen, a name that conjured images of peaceful farmland and maybe a friendly cow or two. Out on that side of town, the streetlights gave way to a blanket of inky blackness and the occasional twinkling star. Deciding which turnoff was actually Creek Road became a guessing game. The dense woods pressed in on both sides, their rustling leaves creating a symphony of gentle sounds. Each twist and turn of the road had me second-guessing myself. Was I headed in the right direction? Was I lost with a car full of rapidly cooling pizza? In a last-ditch effort, I pulled the car onto the gravel shoulder of the darkened road, the headlights casting long shadows that danced across the uneven ground. Grasping at the greasy note, I punched in the phone number scrawled across it. The silence stretched on, with the rhythmic chirping of crickets in the background, hidden in the roadside grass. Just as I was about to hang up, defeated, a gruff voice crackled through the receiver. It was low and deep, yet strangely laced with a gentle drawl. "Hello?" Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. "Hello? This is the pizza guy," I blurted out, my voice a touch higher than usual. "I'm having a bit of trouble finding your house." Another beat of silence followed, then the man on the other end chuckled softly. "Don't worry, son," he drawled. "My driveway's easy to miss. Looks more like a dirt trail than anything else." He went on to describe the surroundings, his voice painting a picture with words. He mentioned a large oak tree with a tire swing hanging from a low branch, and a rusty mailbox shaped like a red pickup truck. With renewed hope, I hung up the phone and gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. Turning cautiously onto the narrow dirt trail, I navigated slowly, my headlights cutting through the darkness like twin searchlights. The dust billowed behind the car, creating a hazy cloud that momentarily obscured the path ahead. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 30 seconds, a single-story house emerged from the gloom. It looked like a ranch-style dwelling, painted a warm yellow that seemed to glow ever so slightly in the darkness. A single light flickered in the window, casting a welcoming rectangle of golden light onto the porch swing. Clutching the two steaming pizzas, the cardboard boxes feeling pleasantly warm against my palms, I crunched across the gravel path towards the front door. No doorbell greeted me, so I rapped my knuckles against the weathered wood, the sound echoing hollowly in the still night air. Muffled music, something old from the 1900s by the sound of it, filtered from within the house. Footsteps shuffled towards the door, a slow and deliberate rhythm that sent a shiver down my spine. The steps stopped abruptly, a beat of silence followed, then the door creaked open, revealing only a sliver of darkness within. A man peeked out from behind the door, his face hidden in shadow. The man behind the door seemed to be deliberately using it as a shield, his body hidden from sight. Hey," I stammered, the sudden silence thick and charged. "Pizza delivery, right?" "Yep, that's me," rumbled the voice, instantly recognizable from our phone call. An awkward silence descended once more, the old scratchy music from another time providing the only distraction. Desperate to break the tension, I blurted out, "Do you have the cash ready?" "Yes, hold on a second," he mumbled, his voice warm despite the odd tension in the air. He shuffled back, the music momentarily replaced by the soft creak of floorboards. As a gentle breeze nudged the door further open, a sliver of light illuminated the interior, revealing a glimpse of a cluttered living room. However, the visual revelation was quickly overpowered by a wave of putrid odor that slammed into me with the force of a brick to the face. The stench was unmistakable, a cloying, sickening sweetness that made my stomach churn and my eyes water. It was the smell of death, and it instantly overshadowed the old music playing from inside the house and the man's friendly demeanor. The seconds stretched into a thick, uncomfortable silence. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, the sound of the crickets outside growing louder in the absence of any other noise. It was getting ridiculous. This whole delivery had been weird. With a growing sense of unease, I rapped my knuckles on the open doorway again. "Sir?" My voice sounded strained, even to my own ears. A muffled response came from somewhere deeper in the house. "Could you come inside to the kitchen, please?" The request seemed so odd, so out of place, that I blinked, momentarily convinced I'd misheard him. "Can you repeat that?" I asked, needing confirmation. "Can you come inside to the kitchen, please?" he repeated, his voice a touch more insistent this time, a hint of urgency creeping in that sent a shiver down my spine. My gut lurched. That wasn't in the training manual. My boss had drilled it into our heads to never enter a customer's house for safety and liability reasons. But in that moment, better judgment took a backseat to a misplaced sense of, well, I wasn't sure what to call it. Misplaced helpfulness, maybe? Against the gnawing voice of caution in my head, I found myself shrugging nonchalantly. I stepped cautiously into the house, the weathered floorboards groaning under my weight like the protests of a reluctant spirit. It wasn't just old. This house was a time capsule, each detail frozen in a snapshot of a bygone era. The house was thick with the smell of dust and echoes of the past. The long, narrow interior stretched before me like a dimly lit tunnel. Dark hallways, their doorways shrouded in shadow, branched off to the left and right like forgotten rooms in a labyrinth. The faded wallpaper clinging precariously to the walls boasted a swirling floral pattern in hues of dusty rose and tarnished gold. It was a design straight out of a 1930s dream, faded with the passage of time. In the corner, a tall grandfather clock stood sentinel, its ornate mahogany frame gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through the half-open door. Its solemn presence was punctuated by the rhythmic tick-tock of its pendulum, a steady heartbeat in the quiet house. Next to it, an old record player whirred to life, its needle whispering across the surface of a dusty vinyl record. A melody, melancholic and hauntingly beautiful, drifted from the speakers, a forgotten song from a long-lost time. To my right, an open doorway offered a tantalizing glimpse into the kitchen. An old cast-iron stove, its once black belly worn smooth to a dull gray by countless meals, stood proudly against the far wall. Gleams of firelight danced in the chipped enamel surface, hinting at a pot simmering on its burner. A porcelain sink, its pristine white surface now yellowed and etched with the passage of years, nestled beneath a small window framed by lace curtains that were more yellow than white. The man's voice, warm and slightly raspy, called out from somewhere inside the kitchen, but I couldn't see him. As I turned my head to the left, a narrow hallway extended before me, its right side lined with closed doors. At the far end, a dim, flickering light casted an unsettling glow on an old woman dancing in the hallway. She was completely naked, her back to me. She swayed and danced slowly to the 1900s music that was being played on the record player in the living room. She was feeling herself. I don't mean that she was confident or anything, I mean that she was literally touching her body, in this disturbingly erratic manner. Her movements were slow, almost dreamlike, as she swayed to the music filtering in from the living room. It wasn't a sensual dance, but rather an erratic exploration of her own body. Her arms swooped and her hands fluttered, tracing lines along her skin in a way that sent a jolt of unease through me. In my time as a pizza delivery guy, I'd seen my fair share of oddballs. A naked lady dancing to old music might sound funny to someone else, but what I was witnessing transcended humor. It was deeply unsettling, the way she moved was such a disconnect from the music, lost in a world of her own. Terror quelled in my gut as I wrenched my gaze away from the disturbing scene in the hallway. I nervously redirected my gaze to the kitchen, catching sight of the man, or at least, what he allowed me to see of him. He was peeking around the corner now, his face concealed by the wall, body hidden. It was him again, but only a sliver of his face was visible, one eye staring at me with an unnerving intensity that made my skin crawl. My mind went utterly blank. All I could manage was a single, desperate question that tumbled out in a strangled whisper. "Do you have the money?" The response the man gave back was not what I expected. Instead of words, a sound erupted from the man's hidden form, a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to crawl up from somewhere deep within the earth. It wasn't laughter, not in any traditional sense. It was a vibration, deep and chilling, that resonated through my bones and made my hair stand on end. It was the sound of something primal, something lurking just beneath the surface of normalcy. Then, with a terrifying suddenness, the horrific laughter was cut short. "Get him, MOM!" The words exploded from the man's mouth, shattering the silence with a force that made me flinch. The volume and raw aggression were a shocking contrast to his previous monotone and soft voice. It was as if a switch had flipped, revealing a hidden fury beneath the calm exterior. My blood ran cold as the full weight of his words sank in. From the hallway on my left, a sound ripped through the air, the sound of rapid footsteps approaching. I whipped my head around just in time to see the naked woman, the one who had been dancing mere moments ago, sprinting towards me. Her speed defied her age, propelled by a terrifying urgency. Pure terror coursed through me, a shot of adrenaline that propelled me into action. Without a single wasted thought, I spun on my heel, the forgotten pizza boxes tumbling from my grasp with a clatter. The door, the only escape, seemed miles away. My legs pumped, an instinctive urge to flee overriding any thought of dignity. I flung the door open with a crash, the hinges groaning in protest, and practically dove through the threshold. Reaching the car, I fumbled with the keys, momentarily cursing my trembling hands. The door flew open, and I virtually flung myself into the driver's seat, slamming it shut with another bone-jarring thud. In a heartbeat, the engine roared to life, the sound a beautiful symphony in the face of the chilling silence behind me. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as I tore out of the driveway. As I sped away, the house receding rapidly in the rearview mirror, I couldn't resist a final glance back. Bathed in the pale moonlight spilling through the open doorway, I saw them, the man and apparently his mom, both completely naked, their forms stark and unsettling against the dark interior. Their faces were obscured by shadow, but the intensity of their gazes seemed to pierce the distance, following me even as I put more and more space between us. Whatever was going on in that house was far from normal. I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that their intentions were anything but innocent. It certainly wasn't about the pizza. Whatever secrets that house harbored, whatever abnormal dynamics existed between the man and his mom, I knew it was something I wanted no part of. I returned to work a few days later, the encounter at the house replaying in my mind on loop. Sharing my story with my coworkers was a mistake. Most of them laughed, just as I expected. "Man, you got chased by a naked old woman?" they joked. Their laughter felt hollow and insensitive, like a swarm of angry bees buzzing in my ears. Frustrated and shaken, I stormed into my boss's office, expressing my desire to never return to the job. He was aware of the court-mandated agreement and tried to persuade me to stay, saying, "If you don't have work to accommodate your neighbor's garage, you'll end up right back in juvie," he warned. The thought of juvenile detention didn't hold the same weight it once did, not compared to what I saw in that house. "I don't care," I blurted out. "I'd rather go back than continue working here." 4 weeks later, I finally landed a job at a local diner. The pay was decent, but after court fees, and the court's mandated agreement to pay off my neighbor's garage, every penny counted. One night, on a late shift, the diner wrapped me in its usual sensory tapestry, the sizzle of burgers on the grill, the dance of waitstaff weaving through patrons, the symphony of cutlery and crockery from the kitchen. As I cleaned a table marred by ketchup smears and abandoned fries, my phone vibrated against my leg. I retrieved it and greeted the caller with an inquisitive, "Hello?" Silence. Then, ragged breaths filled the receiver, shallow and strained. Normally, I would have hung up by now, but I faintly recognized something, the sound of music resonating in the static background of the call. I knew I'd heard the music before, I just couldn't remember where. I listened carefully, and it hit me like a ton of bricks when I realized that it was the same song, that old, scratchy tune from the early 1900s playing faintly in the background. That same exact song I'd heard, in that house.